Okay, moving right into chapter 3. What questions do you have?
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Nick.
I'm confused on what hydroplaning. I'm confused on what that is.
Okay. Um, I can tell you a lot about hydroplaning because I've been involved in 2 accidents in my life. The first accident I was ever in, I was 18 years old, and a guy hit me. And my next accident, I was 19 years old, and I hit a guy by hydroplaning. So what happens is, um, obviously the hydro part is water. So what happens is if you're traveling at a speed, not necessarily too fast, but if you're traveling at a higher rate of speed, and the road is wet, so the road has water on it, uh, there is time where basically, sorry, I'm a science guy, so I'm going to nerd it out here for a second. So when you can't displace the water, so tires have treads and tractions and everything, and it's meant to, as the tire goes through, it displaces the water, so it spreads the water out. And if you've ever seen some tire commercials, that's a lot of times what they'll advertise and they'll show that. Um, so if you're going too fast, it's harder because you're basically trying to displace the water at a faster rate. And when you can't do that, um, in some cases, you have the road, you have the tire, which is what you want. But in some cases, when you can't displace that water, the water becomes a barrier between the tire and the road. And so at that point in time, your tires are not on the road, which is called hydroplaning, which means you can lose control of your vehicle, which happened to me. I was driving down Gordon Drive, and my biggest issue is my tires didn't have good enough traction. They were almost to the point where I probably should have had them changed, but I was a poor college kid and thought, I'll be fine. And uh, a guy had stopped immediately on Gordon Drive, and I wasn't able to react quick enough. I slammed on the brakes, and basically my tires went, my tires basically hydroplaned, so I wasn't able to stop soon enough, and I hit the back of the guy's car. So basically, hydroplaning is water separating the barrier between tires and the road, which is obviously dangerous because you'll lose control of your vehicle.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, so on page 59, it says that braking distances needed to stop a car increased by the square of the amount the speed is increased, and then gave the example. If a vehicle's speed doubles from 40 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour, the distance needed to stop the vehicle increases by 4 times. I don't get like that, how they got 4.
Okay. Obviously, they're experts on driving, not math. Okay. So the easiest way to do that is, how does the speed change? That's the rate that you want to use for the times part. Okay, so if they go from 20 to 40, it doubles, right? Okay, so then square that.
Oh.
So 2 times the speed, 2 squared, 4 times the braking distance. Okay. So let's go from 20 to 60. 20 to 60 is 3 times more the speed, which means you're going to need 9 times the braking distance. And one more, 20 to 80, 4 times the speed, 16 times the braking distance. So that's how all that works, with it being a little bit easier. The first time I read that, when I started going through the book in driver's ed with the old program, I had to try and figure that out as to, how they got those numbers. But if you just take the amount of times the speed changes and you square it, that's how you get the braking distance. But keep in mind, as your speed increases, your braking distance increases exponentially, which means when you increase your speed, it's going to take a lot more braking distance when you increase that speed. Yeah, go ahead, Jace.
What does it mean by performing smooth inputs?
Performing smooth inputs.
Yeah.
You have a page on that?
Yeah, I can find it.
And again, I don't see it offhand. And when I do hear things like that, I just like to have the page reference on there just so I can explain to you what they're trying to explain to you.
Okay. I'll try and find the page.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm not sure. Oh, I may have found it.
It's page 63.
53?
63.
63, okay.
In the first paragraph, last sentence.
Oh, okay. So smooth input, they're talking about just a variety of tasks. So obviously with their big 3 was steering, braking, and accelerating. So if you were at a stop sign or stoplight and it's your turn to go and you start to accelerate, they're basically saying, what's the best way to accelerate? Hammer down on that accelerator. That's not smooth. So gradually pressing the accelerator and continuing to apply more pressure to it will make a smooth transition for you to accelerate. That doesn't mean that you're increasing your speed from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, like gradually. They're just saying as you accelerate, make sure it's smooth. Braking's the same way. When you brake, you don't want to start braking a mile away before you stop. You also don't want to start your braking 20 feet before you're supposed to stop. Just make sure it's appropriate, like start braking when you're supposed to brake, continually press the brake until you can make a smooth stop. And then steering, don't steer all at once. Make sure it's gradual and smooth. So that's what they mean by those are your big three that change the movement of the vehicle. So they're just saying that make sure your application is reasonable and smooth, so you don't have hard stops, you don't have quick starts, and you don't have hard steering. All right, what else? They're good questions today. Other than the input one, to have to look to what they said, you're kind of making me feel smart this morning. I know this chapter talks about a little bit of physics, which might be a little bit easier for you eighth graders who spent some time in Mrs. Arnold's class talking about physics. And did you guys get to the point where you did the car activities? Or did you guys get sent home before that? Okay, if you're not sure, that's probably a no. So, all right, hold on, I'll be right back. Okay. Had to go get a toy for my basement. So at the end of the chapter, they start talking about some of the physical science parts of driving, and talking about your weight distribution. So they gave some examples towards the end with a vehicle. So when you accelerate, the car goes forward, right? But when you accelerate, the back tires are the ones that are going to carry the most weight. So typically when you accelerate, the car tips back. Obviously, this is an exaggeration. Most cars don't go up on two wheels. But this is just to show where the weight distribution goes. So when you accelerate, all the weight is to the back. When you brake, all the weight shifts to the front. Okay. Now, when you look at turning, okay, so in this case, we are going to turn right. Okay. So when you turn right, all the weight distribution goes to the left side. And when you turn left, all the weight distribution goes to the right side. So I want you to think about this. When you're driving or in the vehicle with a parent or sibling or whatever the case may be, when you turn right, what direction do you usually move? Like not the car, but your body. just visualize you making a hard right turn. What direction does your body feel moving now? Peyton?
The left?
It moves to the left. Okay. And the reason for that, again, I don't know if she did it all during the quarantine or if she just did a different set of curriculum, but how many of you heard the word inertia? Oh, good. Somebody be pleased. So when you're driving and you don't feel anything, that is your body being inert. Okay. So when you step on the accelerator, what direction are you moving? Forward, right? What direction do you go when you step on the accelerator? Peyton?
Backwards.
You move backwards. And when you brake, you're not necessarily going in a direction, but you're stopping. But when you brake, the harder you brake, the more forward you lean. Okay? Because when your body is comfortable and inert, it wants to stay in one place. But when you act on it with another force, that's what causes it to change it. Which is why when you make a hard right turn, you can feel yourself going to the left. And when you make a hard left turn, you can feel yourself going to the right in the opposite direction. Okay? So when you make a right turn, your body wants to go straight. Okay? But the force is causing you to move. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? That's kind of in general what the last portion of that chapter was talking about. But when you are stopped or you're traveling at a consistent speed, where's the weight distribution? Is it towards the front? Is it towards the back? Is it on the left side, right side? Is it none of them? Yeah, it's none of them. Okay. And what we consider that is it's stable. Okay. The weight is evenly distributed. So when you drive at a constant speed, you don't feel any force. You don't move forward. You don't move backwards. You don't move side to side. It's stable. And obviously, when you're at a stop, everything's stable. That's important to remember. All right. Anything else? All right. If nothing else, go ahead, turn on your cameras, and go ahead and take the Chapter 3 test. Okay, so while you're getting logged in or getting all that figured out, I just want to remind you, again, I'm going to tell you every test. Obviously, make sure you answer all the questions because you're required to before you submit anyways. But again, please make sure you read through the question, read through all the choices. Try not to overthink any of the questions. Put yourself in the situation. If it's a safety question, what's the most safest answer? If it's a general driving question, what's the most reasonable answer as a driver? And then again, what's the best answer to answer the question? I get a lot of people that overthink stuff, and you really don't need to. Just choose the best answer to the question. All right, chapter 4. What questions do you have? Yep, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, I just have a question. It's not about this, but if we're not done with the test, do you want us to finish that first before we do ask questions, or how do you want us to do that?
I'll leave that up to you. If you want to finish the test first, that's fine. If you want to hold off and do this, again, I apologize for kind of rushing this. I just want to make sure that we get through chapter 4 so we can take 4 and 5 tests tomorrow to be back on track. So whatever you feel is more important. If we go up till 8:30 and you want to finish the test afterwards, I'm okay with that. So I know chapter 4 being starting, steering, and stopping the vehicle. To me, a chapter like this is definitely better applied than it is read. I think some of the ways they describe things may be a little bit tougher to understand. So again, this is a good opportunity to ask questions. And I know some may be a little bit apprehensive to ask questions because you think, well, I don't know if this is a dumb question. And it might be a situation where what really happens, but you just don't quite understand the way they're explaining it. So even if it's a situation where you're just asking, I read this, but what do they mean by it? That's perfectly fine. Kylie, are you okay if I pick on you for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. I was just going to bring up the question you asked yesterday, which obviously by the time we got done talking last night, I think you understood completely what was meant by it, but just the way they explained it, the chapter is a little bit harder to understand when you're not right in front of a vehicle to see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what Kylie asked yesterday was, when starting a vehicle, so let me grab my keys. So there's a setting in the vehicle where you take the keys and you put them in the vehicle and you can take them out. That's basically the off position. Once you turn the key, it basically puts it in a lock position so you can't take it out. Then there's 3 settings. So there's the off, there's the alternator or auxiliary. So when you turn it and you haven't started it, but the radio turns on, The dash lights turn on. You get some lights come on in the vehicle. Basically, the only thing that's working is the alternator, so it runs electrical to it. And then you go to the start mode, but you don't hold it on the start mode. As soon as you let go, it pops back a little bit. So in the reading, it says when you start the vehicle, basically bring the key back, which you don't have to do. It usually does it for you. And that's what Kylie had asked because she didn't quite understand what they were talking about, which worked out great because I was working at the house last night. So I just grabbed the keys and I basically showed her what it was in my truck, which just made a lot more sense. So again, with driver's ed, it is a lot tougher to read some of this stuff when you can't necessarily visualize it. Others, if you may catch on right away and understand, like, okay, well, I get what they're talking about. Whereas some it might be like, you know, obviously with starting a vehicle, that's not a tough concept, but sometimes the way they word things are a little bit tougher. So like I said, don't be afraid to ask questions. In driver's ed, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Because again, some people might think like, well, why are they asking that? That's so obvious. But keep in mind, some of you may have been behind the wheel and driving for a long period of time, and others don't have their permit and have never been behind the wheel. While you're thinking, I can share a brief story. Growing up, I had a lot of experience driving, but I never sat in the driver's seat. Growing up, I spent some time driving with my grandpa to Westfield, Iowa, because two of his brothers lived up there. So if you don't know what Westfield is, I know some of you ladies more than guys, maybe volleyball, you play Akron, Westfield. Akron's the bigger town and Westfield's the smaller town. So it's kind of around that area. But I would always go up with my grandpa and he would let me drive on the way up there or drive on the way back. But I would sit in the passenger seat and reach over and grab the steering wheel and basically steer for him. So that was my experience growing up, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And then my first experience driving in the driver's seat was on Highway 75 coming back from Ottawa, and my dad let me drive by myself, but that was 13 years old. So I was scared as hell. But I did fine. It was easy. It was Highway 75, just a straight shot to Sioux City. And I did okay. But you know, as far as like simple stuff, like I didn't know. So again, in this class, no question is considered a dumb question. It's just all about learning. And again, you know, some of you may think, well, that's easy. How do you not know that? And again, it depends on your experience. Some people have been around cars. I did not grow up around cars, so I had to learn a lot of that stuff. So it does make it a lot tougher to do those things if you don't have the experience. So just bear in mind that people are on different levels of experience. So plus adding the book to it. The book sets a good foundation to explain it, but may not necessarily get through to you to understand what they're explaining. So that's why I want to take this time to really kind of explain it in more appropriate words that might help you understand. So what questions do you have? Yep, go ahead, Sophie.
when it was like explaining the steps start the engine, it said that you should let it idle for like 15 to 20 seconds. Why does it want you to do that?
And you said that was after you start the engine?
Yeah, it had like the steps to start engine and it was on there after
Okay.
you started it. Yeah.
Okay. I think the biggest thing for that is probably just to let it warm up. So there's a lot of things that happen when you start the engine. And actually, in a lot of vehicles, if you go to the auxiliary or the where you run the alternator or the electrical part, if you listen, you can usually hear this like low hum for a second or two. So that's one of the things that the car is getting ready to start. And what that low hum is called your fuel pump. So what it's doing is it's taking a little bit of fuel and getting ready to take the fuel from the tank and send it to the engine. So when you start the vehicle, obviously your fuel pump starts running because it needs to take gas to the engine. The engine itself will start to run motor oil through it because motor oil is basically the blood of your engine, and it's got to have blood flowing through to continue to work. Also, you have some other components like your transmission that has fluid that runs through it. That more so runs when you start changing gears. But then you have your antifreeze and coolant that helps to keep the engine. Obviously, antifreeze and coolant is the same thing, but it does two different tasks. Right now, you would call it coolant because what it does is it keeps the engine cool in the summertime when the temperatures are higher. But in the wintertime, they call it antifreeze because it has it prevents the engine from locking up and freezing in the wintertime. So they call it antifreeze for the cold portion. They call it coolant for the hot portion. And basically what it is, it's just this liquid that has this wide variety of a freezing point and a boiling point to keep the engine from overheating or freezing. So the long story now to get back to your answer is those are some of the things that happen when you start your vehicle, which is why they have you request that you wait 15, 20 seconds just to let those things start going before you start driving. Are you going to kill your vehicle by putting it in gear and driving right away? No. I mean, a lot of times I don't usually wait. Unless it's the wintertime, I let it warm up a little bit and let things run. But in the summertime, I'm not usually very good about that. It's not the worst thing in the world, but that's one of the reasons why they recommend that you do that, just to let things start flowing in the vehicle before you drive. All right, what else? Yeah, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, this might seem like really weird because it's not a question on here and I'm just confused. Well, like about like an obvious thing. Okay, so when you know how like you drive normally with your right foot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're left dominant, you still go with your right foot. Like I just think like I don't know why. I just don't know why it's like that. That's all I really had to say. So I was just confused.
Okay. You know, and I don't know if people, I've never had anyone try to drive with their left foot. and I honestly don't know what the science behind using your right foot is. You know, if it's because most people are right-handed and right foot dominant. You know, I guess I never really thought about it because I've always seen it that way, and that's always the way it is. I guess it might be a little bit different for me. I am left-handed, so, but you know, as far as driving with my right foot, to me, it's just that's the way it is. I'm just used to that. If it ever came down to a vehicle where you had to drive with your left foot, that would be extremely uncomfortable for me. But that's because I've been driving for 20 some years with my right foot. I know the way things are set up is when you have manual transmissions, you have to use both feet because the clutch, where you shift gears, you have to use your left foot. So in most cases, you're actually driving with both of your feet because you have to accelerate. And then when you back off the accelerator with your right foot, you push in the clutch with your left and switch gears. So, yeah, I would just say that's, you know, not necessarily a question, but, you know, obviously an interesting observation. And like I said, it's not dumb. You know, to me, it's just normal. I've never really thought of it. But yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess in hearing that observation, I'd be interested to see what European vehicles do when they drive on the opposite side of the road. So they drive on the left side, whereas we drive on the right. Their steering wheel is where our passenger seat is. So I'd be interested to know, I guess I've never really thought about that, if their pedals are backwards, you know, if they drive with their left or if it's still the right. You know, I really don't know. That'd be interesting to find out. All right, what else? I mean, do we have less questions because this is more application and you do understand what this is or what you think? I mean, as I go through, I see some different things in here. Anyone not understand what ABS is? Anti-lock brake system. Some of you in the wintertime will appreciate if your vehicle has anti-lock brake system. Yep, go ahead, Peyton.
On one of the head titles, it says like power brakes and signaling before braking. What's a power brake?
So power brakes are kind of like power steering. So with power steering, if you turn the steering wheel, your wheels will turn more than what you actually steer. Usually it's 2.5 turns that you have to make for the steering wheel, or I think a total of 5 from right to left or left to right. In vehicles that aren't power steering, think of like a go-kart. This or this. It makes it a lot more fluent when you turn. So power brakes kind of work in the same way. When you apply the brakes, you get a lot more braking power from that. It's a lot more fluid than just it's not necessarily the fact that it makes it stop more quickly, but it's just you don't have to apply the brakes as much to get the stopping power that you need. So I've never really dealt with power brakes before. I know different vehicles are different, and what you're going to find out when you get into the driver's ed vehicle, it's probably going to be different from what you're used to. So yeah, it's just one of the things that, you know, it just takes a little bit to get used to. Brakes are different, steering's different, you know, and you're going to find that as you get into different vehicles that different vehicles have different feels to them. Yep.
Okay, so when this one where it says sequence for stopping and securing vehicle, and so like when I would drive, like, so let's say I come to my complete stop or whatever, and then on here it says, so, you know, keep your foot on brake and then shift it to park and then turn off your ignition. But on here it says set the parking brake, but I don't know what that means, because when I drive, I just like keep my foot on brake and then put it to park and then turn it off.
Yeah, and here's the thing. They recommend that you set the parking brake, but here's the thing. You don't live on a hill, so you don't need to set the parking brake. I'll share a story with you guys tomorrow about that, so in case I forget, remind me. You'll appreciate this one. But the idea is you either set the parking brake all the time or you don't set it at all. That's the message, basically the story that I'll tell you tomorrow. But if you're on a hill, it's recommended that you set the parking brake. And basically what that is, that's just one extra protection so your car doesn't move when it's parked. All right, so it's 8:30 now. We'll wrap this up. Again, if you needed to finish the test, make sure you get that test turned in. I didn't check notes today, so I'll check those tomorrow. But what we'll do is if you have any other questions on 4, we'll answer those right at the beginning. And then we'll take the test shortly after that. Then we'll review 5 and then take chapter 5 test tomorrow. So one last thing I'm going to leave you guys with. I realized I forgot to put one thing on that survey. So instead of deleting the survey, adding the question and resending it out to you, especially for those of you that have already turned in the survey. One thing I forgot to mention is times that you cannot drive. Okay. If you have a certain set of time or there's a week vacation that you're going to be gone, make sure email that to me. So when we go to plan, we don't schedule you during that time when it's not going to work for you. Typically our driving is going to be either in the morning or in the afternoon, early afternoon, like an 8 to noon or a noon to 4. So if it's something like some of you have that Move 360, okay, mornings probably aren't going to work for you unless it absolutely has to. Others, you may have something going on in the afternoon. It just kind of all depends. Question is, what day do we drive on? It depends. We're available Monday through Friday. Some teachers are willing to do weekends as well. But typically it'll be a Monday through Friday. So just make sure if there's a time frame that it's not going to work, just make sure email me. If you're good Monday through Friday through the entire summer, then you don't need to email me. Okay? So with that, make sure you have chapter 4 good to go, and chapter 5, read and take notes. Have a good evening. Have a good day.